Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Thank you very much for being here. My name is Mark Carney, and I'm going to be speaking to you today about how to think like a hacker, introducing hacker vision. First of all, I'd like to thank Ardian at PECB and PECB themselves for being our hosts for this webinar. And hopefully today we're going to introduce to you some interesting and hopefully novel ideas for how to adopt the attacker mindset in security. So a little bit about myself first. My name is Mark Carney. If you've heard that name before, it's probably because it's the same name as the Governor of the Bank of England, sadly, though without his property options in London. So I am currently a full-time PhD student at the University of Leeds, finishing a PhD in mathematics, but my real life in my career, I've been a penetration tester, a senior penetration tester for financial institutions and the UK government. And then moving on from there, I've now joined security research labs in Berlin as a security researcher and expert consultant. So I live and breathe and spend all my time when I'm not doing mathematics, doing security. And I want today to introduce to you some interesting ideas to do with how we can better view the world and our own networks and our own security controls from the point of view of an attacker. So we all know that security faults are quite common across different technologies. We're well aware of vulnerabilities such as SQL injection and how they are used to compromise networks and websites the world over. However, we've had these problems for some time now. Taking SQL injection as my favorite example, it was first released in, I think, FRAC 63, Christmas Day, 1998. For a little bit of perspective, SQL injection, if it were a person, has just finished or is halfway through their gap year in Goa backpacking and is about to go to college. So we've had these problems for some time, and yet the release of the vulnerability for SQL injection included the fix, the canonical fix, that is parameterizing queries, preparing statements, that kind of thing. So clearly we have to change our thinking about security almost globally to really improve things. And part of what I hope to do today is to show you that we can indeed preempt these common issues if we view the world and if we view our networks, like I said, from an attacker's point of view. Now, the attacker's point of view leads to better informed security decisions than just a checkbox approach. Checkboxes generally, things like a PCI DSS or FIPS 140-2, they tend to be more checklist exercises to make sure that you've got a good baseline, but they don't really help you, by and large, in going further, going beyond that. So today what we're going to do is show you how to develop an attacker's perspective, this hacker vision in the title, and how to generally better improve your threat modeling and keeping up to date with hacking knowledge so that you can begin thinking about security in a much more, hopefully, effective way. So here's an agenda overview of what we're going to cover today. Some introduction first on current security methodologies. Then I'm going to introduce some ideas around hacker vision. This is how to see like you're a potential attacker. And then I'm going to give you some examples. You'll see the phrase an intuition pump. I've taken that from Dan Dennett's 1984 book, Elbow Room, where he talks about thought experiments that don't get bogged down in nefarious or awkward details, that really help you get to the middle of a problem and get to the core of an idea so that you can better understand what the main takeaways are. So hopefully these examples will serve as pumps for your intuition so that you can start seeing the way that your attackers do in your own context in your organizations. And then some conclusions at the end. So in terms of my overall thinking, I'm heavily indebted to Win Schwartau, the venerable Win Schwartau, who has really, especially over the last year that I've had the opportunity to speak with him at length and have some visibility on his current projects, all of which are being revealed next year. And the thinking that I really kind of took away from it is to think the way that effective people do. And this is very, very kind of in vogue. It's been around for some time. But when it comes to security, a very effective model is the OODA loop. So to get loopy, here's what you do. You start and you observe the world. So you take in some sensor data, and then you orient that data. So what that means is that you apply some filters, maybe move the data around a little bit, get the right perspective on the data. And to me, this is actually the most important point of the whole loop, is the orientation. Because once you have that, you can come up with your success-fail criteria and effective actions. And once you have those, you can then go, right, I'm going to decide what to do. Maybe you apply some restrictions. Maybe you simply want to monitor things further. Maybe you begin some deeper analysis in your security. And then moving forward, you then actually do something. So you execute the action. And then you say, right, did it work? Did it not work? That output then becomes part of the input along with more sensor data into your observation stage, and then you keep going from there. That's the OODA loop. It was identified mainly from effective fighter pilots in, I think, the 50s and 60s by Colonel John Boyd of the USAF. And from there, it kind of has come out to be an acknowledged model of what an effective decision-making process looks like. So in security, you'll find that some people will talk about these OODA loops quite freely, and that's because they're very effective. So we're going to mainly concentrate today on the observation stage, maybe a little bit on the orientation, but primarily observation. I want to get you seeing the data that's in front of you. I want you to get to see the way that your network is put together from the way that your attacker would. So when we have security, here are some common faults and some common good things. I don't think we talk enough about what works in security. We're too much doom and gloom in the industry, I think, sometimes. So here's what I think, just a quick summary of what I think people do right and what I think people get wrong with certain criteria. So when it comes to their security assessments, people who are doing security right, by and large, will have regular assessments. They will do regular penetration tests and code reviews, and they'll also use red team exercises or in-house exercises to assess their readiness when it comes to security incidents. And what people do wrong when it comes to assessments is they bury their head in the sand. I call it ostrich security, where you bury your head in the sand and, it's not my problem. Who would hack me? I'm not a target. And, missing patches. Who cares? Ignoring configuration advice. That's hard work for a Friday, isn't it? Essentially, what happens is that your assessments that happen or take place or are commissioned don't translate into meaningful action. And that's a common, probably the most common flaw with security for an organization. Risk management is a very big area, and I'm sure the audience here is very, very aware of how risk management is done. When it's done effectively, what you get out of it is a decent attack surface identification and threat management through effective ranking of the attacks that can be levied against you. But when people get it wrong, they tend to have adopted what you could call a fortress mentality, to borrow Wynn's phrase, where you think, build a higher wall, it'll be fine. Whereas they don't pay attention to what I call, after Wynn, the detection in depth, as opposed to defense in depth as well. So we need these two things to complement each other. We need these two things to work with each other. We need also good security awareness. And people who do that generally have awareness at all levels of their organization. Their developers maybe go on courses to learn from hackers like me how I'm going to break your software and what you can do about it, more importantly. Your network operations and security operations centers are regularly assessed for their readiness. And your end users are also aware of what can go wrong, not just what they will experience as a potential attack, but also what they can do about it. And your CSIRTs and CERTs, by and large, will have adequate powers and correct procedures to be able to act quickly and efficiently against an imminent or currently undergoing threat. What goes wrong with security awareness tends to be things like blaming users. Ah, stupid user clicked on stupid link. Haha, wow, duh, blame the user. Whereas actually, really, what we should be doing is maybe empowering users to go, well, maybe we did something wrong in terms of letting a phishing email through, say, and maybe we can improve our detection there, but we can also improve and empower a user to say, hey, I think this is a phishing email. You guys in the Security Operations Center should probably know about this. And even down to pen test reports, people who do security right, by and large, they read their pen test reports. People who don't do security right, by and large, don't read them. I have had reports that I've spent long hours getting the exec summary, just the right wording that I think will work for the client, and then I've got the summary vulnerabilities down to a place that I really like it. The vulnerability descriptions themselves are effective and they work, and then I find out that the report that I spent a good amount of time reporting on and putting together is currently holding open meeting room 3, the door to meeting room 3. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but it does happen. So what do I mean by this possibly cheesy phrase, hacker vision? Well, I'm taking a leaf out of the book of the rather famous Maltese philosopher, thinker, and writer Edward de Bono, who came up with a way initially to teach critical thinking in schools, although it has been adopted by business management the world over, which is called the 6 thinking hats. So to optimally adopt adversarial thinking, what we want to do is build a modality, something that you can put on your hacker vision goggles, put on your security hat, and start thinking in the right way. So let's just go over very briefly what the key parts of this particular model are. So here we have the blue hat, which is the managing hat. It looks at the bigger picture. You've got the red hat, which takes a scenario or an idea and looks at the emotional or gut reactions. The yellow hat of optimism. So try to see the sunny side. What's good about something? Not just all doom and gloom. And you might use the green hat of creativity, so thinking outside the box, really running into the fields and playing with an idea. And then the black hat of discernment. Maybe there are things we should be cautious and conservative about, things we should be practical and realistic when we assess them. And then likewise, there's the white hat of information, which is simply what are the facts. So when we take this kind of model and we move forward, maybe we can create this idea of a security hat. Maybe we can look at the way in which we see things and change it by asking the right kinds of questions. So for example, features in a product, or and here I mean a device or a website or an API or whatever. I'm speaking quite generically here. We can maybe see these features as being tools. So what tools are of interest to an attacker? Is there user functionality, like a search bar that they will try and find SQL injection in? Is there administration functionality, where they can try and leverage some control over the application itself? And is there some developer functionality? I mean, if I can start to develop parts of your website, as in get functions and controls that normally only developers have, then I can probably do some damage and get some access that I really shouldn't be able to. A common example of this is the password reset functionality being broken through what is called, and please do Google this if you haven't heard of it, the Insecure Direct Object Reference, or an IDOR. Now, an IDOR is when you have the password reset function saying, oh, please reset the password of ID user equals, and then there's a number. If I change that number and there's not an adequate check in place, that's the IDOR, by the way, then I can change someone else's password, potentially. And I see that vulnerability quite a lot. Another one is on an order view. So you have order.php that gives you a web page with an overview of your order. And then I can go, I can see in the URL, question mark, order ID equals, and then a number. What if I change that backwards 1? Can I see other people's order information? So seeing these features and instead turning them into a tool for data exfiltration or unauthorized access. Likewise, repurposing technology is very common. Can I take a product and can I change its purpose? And can I do that for, say, malicious monetization? Because if I can turn your, I don't know, smart kettle or smart device into a Bitcoin miner or add it to my botnet, then and assuming I'm a criminal, of course, then I absolutely will. And that happens depressingly regularly now. We have to ask questions relating to this shift, and we have to say, right, if I have an API function, can I use this API function to abuse the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of my data? Similarly, control bypasses. Can I identify the controls and then identify weaknesses in those controls? And this extends far beyond the realm of cybersecurity. This goes into things such as, okay, we're going to secure this particular cabinet with a padlock, say, and the padlock might be pickable. Is it? How hard is it to pick? How secure are your users' passwords? I'm aware of clients that actually do quarterly password cracking exercises just to see how easy their user passwords are to crack. Are you doing two-factor authentication correctly? This is a very oft misunderstood idea in security, where you have a user login and a password, and on the second screen is a second password. People go, there's two factors. Whereas anyone, and I very much am sure that there are people here who are currently screaming at their laptop what the right answer is, that actually two-factor authentication covers 2 factors from 3, namely something you are, something you have, and something you know. So a password is something you know, and a password with an authentication token, such as an RSA token or Google Authentication app token, is something that you have. And then maybe a password with a fingerprint, something you are, is another two-factor authentication scheme. And that's quite often misunderstood. But ultimately, it comes down to a question of how do you define and enforce trust? What do you define as being trusting of a user or of someone in an organization or of a customer? And then how do you enforce that? And can I find a way around those restrictions? Likewise, monitoring and notification is very important. In addition to assessing the coverage of your protection, you should also assess how well the notification works. If there's one thing that's worse than actually being hacked, it's actually being hacked and not knowing about it. And we laugh when we hear that kind of phrase. However, my example here would be Home Depot, and they were hacked in 2014, if I remember rightly. They are a company that, if you look it up, are worth, or rather their turnover annually is $8.1 billion. That's a lot of money. And they were hacked in 2014 by use of default credential on a supplier VPN connection, I think it was. And the attackers got in and they started setting up ways of snaffing credit card numbers out of the network. And over a period of 8 months, the attackers were able to get out somewhere in the region of between 53 and 56 million credit card records. The way that it was notified was that the credit card companies noticed long before Home Depot did. So ask yourself, if someone disabled a door lock or compromised a physical control, how long would it take you to notice? If someone added or compromised a domain admin account in your network, how long would it take you to notice? These are the kinds of questions I want people to start asking. And the benefits are hopefully relatively immediate. When it comes to your attack surface, exposing data about weaknesses in your attack surface demonstrates how well your currently active controls are. Likewise, if you can rank identified threats better, then you can see maybe there are better controls that are more appropriate, or the current controls that are in place are fine. You might also say for assessments that you can have a better definition of an assessment. People forget that if you're paying $15,000 for a penetration test from a reputable company, you can actually do a lot of definition on that. You can say, I have this threat in mind. Can you test it for me? And the answer from the team of pen testers will probably be, yeah, that sounds like fun, actually. Likewise, when it comes to your maintenance, it can expose where improvements can be made in your software development lifecycle, your patch management, as well as your incident response and incident management. When things are going down, what can you do and what can you do better? Overall, you get greater visibility of a defense posture, security posture, by adopting a more pointed adversarial assessment view. And that's the core idea that I really want to hit home. So, this is the fun bit, okay? There are some examples here that I hope are going to be interesting to people, and I've got some sort of some war stories to go with them, don't worry. And these are to try and get you thinking about things in the right way. So first of all, some physical examples. I really hope that this is obviously wrong to everyone here. I'm very sure that it is. So here we have a gate with a please close the gate, don't leave it open sign, and nothing else. Often these sorts of images are captioned the Windows firewall, or something along those lines. I don't want to be so disparaging. I actually think the Windows firewall has come leaps and bounds recently, and I think that we're having some really good conversations about the security of en masse operating systems at the moment. But this is the kind of thing which is obviously wrong. So we don't need hacker vision to see that. We just need what you might refer to as common sense. But what about this? This is a padlock, master lock. It's got hardened on the buckle. Look at that, hardened. Must be good, right? Yeah, have a think. What could go wrong? Can you see a security flaw there? What can you spot? Well, when you actually look into it, these locks are quite easy to compromise. I've put some QR codes in these examples to research papers, slides, and in this case, a YouTube video. So if you want to have a scan of that as I'm talking, please do. And you'll see a video of someone showing you how to pick it. For those of you who are not able to scan that or want me to go through, the idea is that you see the kind of like a orangey, coppery forked plate that's sitting with the tongues between each of the actual rotors for the combination lock. This allows you to actually open the lock if you can push it up. When the right combination is put in, that those levers are lifted, and then that pushes down at the top of the lock on the pivot, which is that little circle in the middle, and then that allows the lock to be opened. Okay, so on the right, lower right, you can see someone inserting a crafted tool. He went all out. He made it out of using an angle grinder or a metal sander and what I think was an Allen key in that example. And he just sort of sticks it in, and it just pops that little lever up, and suddenly the lock opens. They're trivially easy to pick. I know that Master Lock are more than aware of this particular issue with these locks, the Master Lock 175s. But you can see here that you would maybe trust this with a bike if it wasn't too expensive, say, or with sort of closing off the casement around your tap. However, you wouldn't trust this to your security server rooms, say. How about this? So this is a Bluetooth-enabled smart lock. Those of you who are up to the minute with your hacking knowledge will have had a big grin on your faces going, yes. Those of you who don't know, I would suggest that you listen to this example and story quite carefully. So these are very well known for having some flaws that are, shall we say, rather obvious mistakes that have been made in the production of these devices. So just to go over the use case for these, they sit in a door, and they have a little lock on the right-hand side. There's a little circuit inside just behind the black panel, and that controls a little pin which allows the door handle, which is the silver handle on the front, to open or not. Okay, and those LEDs to just give you an idea of what's going on, whether or not the handshake with the phone was successful or not. So you get an idea that actually, yeah, there should be a level of security here. Unfortunately, you would be wrong. Scan the QR code to find out more if you're curious. But these locks have had some issues with them. My favorite being that actually it's very easy to intercept Bluetooth traffic. The range on Bluetooth is about 10 meters. And that's actually quite large if you think about it. The other issue being here that the admin functionality and other functions of the lock are transmitted in clear text, in plain text. Namely, there is no even an attempt to encrypt the communications with these locks. And so, as you can see on the left here, this opcode 00 on the slide that I've reproduced on the left, you can see the current password and the new password is all transmitted in absolute plain text. There's no attempt to actually hide the value here. So what happens is that the lock can be reassigned or changed in many, many ways. And I do recommend that if you're curious, go and have a look at the DEF CON slides from DEF CON 24 given by Anthony Rose and Ben Ramsey, who did some really good work on this. I'd also point you towards the work of Slavomir Ješek and Damian Kokil in Paris, who have done some really, really lovely work on Bluetooth security. And yeah, that's a very interesting area to get some really fun knowledge about the devices that are now pervading into our homes and into our lives. So maybe let's go for a slightly less obvious example. What's wrong with this door? Have a look. See what you can see. So clearly this is the controlled side of the door. So you can see that with the keypad on the right. If I can take your eyes down to the bottom where the floor is, you'll see nothing, because if you trust a hacker to tell you where to look, you're wrong. Look at the top. That's where the issue is. The maglock is on the wrong side of the door. What do I mean? Here's an example. So this is a different maglock, but they're all more or less constructed the same way. So here you can see that you can actually disassemble the magnetic aperture itself, and you can take apart the parts of the lock. So on some locks, they have these nuts here, you can see on the top. You remove that and the door will just open because the plate will just slide off, and the brackets are made of aluminium. Because, you know, why not? It's very light and very cheap. It's of course not magnetic, so it won't actually hold the door closed potentially. Likewise, on the lower hand side, you can see that that lovely cover comes off and exposes 5 screws. So if I can actually take off those 5 screws, on the previous door it's a push door. So I take the 5 screws out and then I just push the door and it's open. Okay? It's a common mistake, and now that you've seen it here, if you haven't spotted it before, you'll probably notice it in lots of places, and you'll probably have words with various people about maybe we should fix that, or maybe it doesn't matter. So likewise, another point about door security is keypads. There's some really fun examples on you can find on Google image searches, but by and large, have a look at Bruce Schneier's blog, links in the QR code, for how actually keypads can leak information about what's been going on in terms of the security of those doors. Physical security is a fascinating area, as I hope you'll agree, and having a level of familiarity with that is both interesting, I think so, maybe you agree, and is also quite fun actually to have a go and actually maybe try and pick a padlock if you're that interested and that way inclined. Now, network examples. How does a hacker see your network? What does a hacker see when they see your network? Maybe they would see this. This is horrible. I love decent cabling, and this certainly isn't. And you might think, oh, this is just a funny example. It's just, oh, it's just bad management. However, the question you have to ask yourself is, would you spot a malicious network implant? What do I mean by a network implant? Well, it's a posh way of saying malicious malware or malicious devices being placed on a network to give outsider access. So here, I am actually relatively convinced that if you look on the right of the picture on the left here, the bird's nest, you'd see some empty server slots. And I wouldn't be surprised if I could get a server in there. And when I say I wouldn't be surprised, I mean that in the sense that I may or may not have actually done that on a social engineering engagement. And it's amazing what you can actually get in and out of a building with a red team engagement or with a social engineering engagement sometimes. But here we want to also look at device security. So those of you familiar with PCI requirements like 9.9 or even as part of your pen testing 11.3, you know that you have to do adequate security controls, and now they extend to physical security controls. On the bottom right here, you will see what's called a LAN turtle. These are developed by a company called Hack5. If you're not familiar with them, they make a tool, or are a lot of famous for making a tool called the Wi-Fi Pineapple, which is a really cool tool to have a look at and have a play with. Here they made the LAN turtle. So what does this do? Well, it has a USB plug on the right, and you can't see it here, but it actually has an Ethernet socket on the other end. The USB port gets plugged in to a computer, and it will do its very best to emulate the default Ethernet network settings. It will copy them onto itself. Then it will spin up the local Ethernet port and pass through traffic from the USB port to the Ethernet port. Absolutely no problem. However, now the device is powered, is on the network, and can do something malicious. What it does is it uses scripts to connect out through your outbound network connection and work its way out towards the internet, where there should be a malicious server waiting for the interception of the connection. And then it will set up a two-way tunnel, much like a VPN, only they tend to use like a reverse SSH tunnel. It can also use, for those of you who are technically interested, DNS tunneling or ICMP ping tunneling to get out of a network. This then means the attacker, having hidden this network on this device on your network, can access your network without actually being in the building anymore. Now, maybe that's an extreme example, you might say, but what else is there out there for USB, malicious USB devices and attacks? Well, on the left here, you'll see what's called a DigiSpark. These are great. They use what's called an ATtiny85 chip. What that can do is it can be programmed to emulate a keyboard. And it can emulate a keyboard with scripts on it so that it can type by itself. Now, I can type pretty quick. I can get it to 90 and 100 words a minute if I'm having a good day. This thing can outstrip me completely. This thing can type really fast, really, really fast. The point of this is these are often called the rubber ducky attack, after a tool, again, by Hack5 of the same name, and very, very similar construction. The idea here is that I can script to take over a network or to do something malicious from a logged in or even logged off computer in some cases, and then use that to get some sort of leverage, privilege escalation, command execution on a machine on your network. The alternative is what's actually called bad USB, which is a repurposed flash drive in this case, done by SR Labs, my colleagues, Carsten Noll and Jakob Lau, who did some incredible work on this, where they repurposed a flash drive's microcontroller, because actually your thumb drives have a microcontroller on them, and it's ARM-based. And they repurposed this to create a malicious network device, which would then actually serve to give a malicious network connection, which meant that they could take over the control of the flow of data on that particular target machine. Speaking more generically about network-based attacks, here is a common attack called the pass the hash attack, where essentially sometimes on client networks, Windows domains, you'll have the local administration password being the same on all the client machines for, say, a floor, or even for all the client machines in the whole organization. And you wouldn't think, well, it's a client machine, it's not a server. What can you do with that? Well, here's what you can do. Notice that on a client machine in particular, there's not really much difference between a local administrator and a domain administrator. So actually, if the local administration password is shared, then if an attacker compromises one client, they can then take the password hash of the local admin there. They don't even need to crack it in Windows Authentication. They can just take the password hash of the local admin and use that to log in to C3 in this example, where there is a domain admin logged in. On the right, you'll see a QR code, which will take you to a tool published by MWR Labs in 2012. It's quite an old attack, this, where you can see how to go from local admin to domain admin quite easily by impersonating Windows Authentication tokens, which you have to be an administrator. But it doesn't say you have to be a domain administrator. You can just be a local administrator. So this is a pass the hash attack, and then kind of privilege escalation, but really you don't escalate upwards. You go from local admin sideways to domain admin on a network. And this is a very common attack, which if you've had a pen test and you had common client machine local admin passwords, you are probably already aware of. And now some of my favorite examples of attacks are IoT examples. So here we want to talk about devices that we have and that maybe we trust, and perhaps what we shouldn't. So let's start here. Would you trust this? Is this something, have a think, is this something that you would entrust? It's very often used for relatively overt in this case, but sometimes more covert monitoring, CCTV, access to be able to monitor your home or your office over the internet. So that means that these devices have internet connectivity. And what you see is probably a small little camera that is nice and capable with some video streaming software. Maybe you can view that on an application on your mobile phone or on your laptop or through a website or a cloud service, and you can get notifications to those devices. And you're seeing a whole plethora of nice functions that these things can do. And I see that, but I also see something else. I see that these are actually small Linux servers. Specifically, small Linux servers that are very badly maintained in some cases and tend to run quite out-of-date software. In fact, actually, most of the IoT space is suffering from a severe set of supply chain issues where there are companies that make software bought by, licensed by actual chip manufacturers, integrated circuit silicon manufacturers. The silicon manufacturer then puts that software into their software development kit, say for the code that goes into the Arduino IDE for you, you Arduino hackers out there. And then this software is then used to develop further software, and you can see that actually things are broken. If anything is broken in that chain, it gets passed down right down to the end user via a sequence of developers. And the fault happens when people at the very source of a problem don't update their software. So we've seen lots of attacks on these in recent times. Some really quite brilliant work by Balthasar Martin and Fabian Brownline, two more of my colleagues at Security Research Labs, which was released at DeepSec a few weeks ago in Vienna to great acclaim. And I put a QR code and link to their work there. They were able to actually do so. I won't spoil it too much for you, but they were able to get some pretty low-level control of some of these devices, and were able to really get to grips with what was going on and found some quite serious issues. So please do go and have a look at that particular research, and maybe think twice about putting an IP camera directly onto the internet, or a DVR tends to also be another victim of attack. Speaking about DVRs and IP cameras, we all heard, it's old news now really, but the IoT apocalypse was often touted as being, it's around the corner. And then, in my view, it kind of happened. Mirai came along, and Mirai was a botnet that was capable of assembling off very limited resource machines, but was able to spread very effectively around lots and lots of these machines. How did it spread? Did it use a 0-day? Did it use a low-level widespread exploit on a particular chip? No. It used 30 telnet logins, default telnet logins, and a telnet scanner. And that's how it spread. Quite simple, really. The devices were on the internet, they had telnet exposed, and you could just log into them. And that's how it spread. Now, why do I mention Mirai? Well, and why do I think it was kind of somewhat of a very serious issue? Well, it was capable of taking out the internet of a country. Some people didn't hear about this, but Liberia, so no Western country really fell to this, but certainly the African nation of Liberia suffered terribly at the hands of Mirai. It was a botnet that was strong enough to actually attack the BGP infrastructure of an entire country and bring it to a halt. A zombie army of cameras and DVRs capable of taking out a country. It's incredible to think of. Likewise, in November 2016, we saw a vulnerability being exploited in Certainly I saw it in Germany and also in the UK. In Germany, it was a denial of service for the devices, and in the UK, it actually led to actual compromise of some deal recruiters by means of abuse of what's called the TR69 interface. Now, you may say, what's the TR69 when it's at home? It's actually better known by CWMP, or for those of you who are technical, the CPE WAN Management Protocol. Essentially, CWMP is the way in which your telco pushes updates to your, say, your triple play devices by means of your router. And it is capable of uploading firmware, sending commands, and if there's a vulnerability in it, it's running as root. In fact, actually, on all of these devices, everything runs as root. Everything. And the issue here was that there was an exploit to get remote code execution, command execution that would then call out remotely to download some code, which would be run locally, and then the devices were pushed onto another botnet. We're seeing some very serious issues, and we need to maybe start seeing things as they really are. It's not necessarily just an IoT device. It's also potentially a Linux server or a point of entry for mal-data. A story I heard recently was of a mal-data attack in, I think, California, I was reading, where one of the farmers had a Zigbee network, for those of you who know what they are, which was designed to control very accurately the sprinklers by means of a sensor net across the whole farm. And his neighbor didn't really like this. And the story goes that he injected mal-data, that's malicious data, into this sensor network, which caused the sprinklers to overwater. Now, when the sprinklers were overwatering, it killed the crop. But also, because it's California, he got fined, because, you know, it's a good chunk of it's quite desert-like. And he got fined for overuse of water. So we are seeing very real-world attacks come into play from IoT and connected devices. We need to really rethink in some areas what we're doing there. So, comes to conclusions. When we see through hacker vision, it greatly improves your awareness of gaps in your security, specifically like in your endpoint protection. If we adopt the dynamic adversarial mindset, then we can apply it to our security and get out much more knowledge about what's really going on. I think that we should really keep up to date with hacking trends and knowledge and hacking research, and watching videos from DEF CON and Black Hat events and that kind of thing really are worthwhile when you have security as part of your concern or part of your organization's portfolio. And likewise, it should be able to very quickly help you identify what we call in the industry the low-hanging fruit, which are the things that really should be fixed as a matter of course. And this also helps you get more value out of your pen tests and from your assessments. We get better coverage of our endpoint attack surface. We reveal things that are, we have revealed to us rather, things that are lax or not fit for purpose. And it also shows us what fixes are effective. Like I said, we're too doom and gloom in this industry. I think we need to also highlight, this is working, this is good in this particular scenario. We can also say that our awareness improves, then our assessment planning and other areas of our security improves. But I must also stress, and really cannot vehemently stress enough, that hacker vision and adopting the attacker mindset internally isn't a substitute for appropriate professional security assessments and well thought out security planning. It's designed to be a modality of thought, a way that you can just put on a security thinking hat and take away from it some really niche and really good ideas about your security in a context, and really bring out the very best in your security assessments as well. So I would like to thank Ardian and PECB for hosting me. I'm going to hand over to him now, and he's going to talk, I think, about some of the training for PECB.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for this great presentation once again. Before moving to the Q&A session, I want to inform you that PECB provides training and certification services for ISO 27032, Introduction, Foundation, Lead Implementer, and Lead Auditor. A PECB certificate will exemplify your dedication in implementing and managing these processes and frameworks, and most importantly, you will be recognized worldwide. Now we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees regarding today's topic. The first question is, what are some of the most used tools by hackers in today's world?
So when you want to look at the attacker toolkit, the place to really start, if you want to start looking at this more seriously, is a Linux distribution, actually. It's called Kali Linux. It's very well known to all hackers. When I started out even doing this professionally, I was using it myself, and that has built into it the most common tools for different scenarios. So it'll vary depending on what your target is, but by and large, you'll find them in Kali Linux. Things like Metasploit, Bluetooth hacking tools, some hardware hacking tools, web hacking tools, some scanners, and lots of other things can be found there. So rather than give you lots of specific examples, I'll direct you to Kali Linux and say, look there, and I think you'll find some interesting stuff.
Thank you, Mark. Now the second question is, if you suspect that a hacker has penetrated into your system, into your company's system, what is the first thing that you do?
The first thing to do is not panic. And the second thing to do, I think, is to follow your procedure. So in the run-up to this, you should try and now have an effective procedure for dealing with a potential breach. You should know who to call. You should know what forensics you need to do. The forensics that can be done are going through logs, working out what's happened, and being able to see what seems to have been the cause of an exploit and what data has been leaked. We all know about GDPR, for example, so this is a very important stage now. So what I do is I think the preemptive strike is best, and I think the best thing you can do is speak to a security professional, have a good relationship with your pen testing firm, and yeah, don't panic, I think, is the best thing to do.
Thank you, Mark. Another question is the deception technology effective?
So deception technology, and here I think in terms of the hardware examples for USB, say, they're very effective. They exploit and take advantage of things which people tend to ignore. Case in point, DNS tunneling, which is the ability to get out of a network which is normally restrictive with a web proxy using DNS traffic. Because DNS, by and large, is permitted out of a network. And I say, oh, this is an attacker's tool. I saw a company saying, oh, you can get free Wi-Fi all over the world by using our service. And all they were doing is offering basically a pretty big button on your Windows machine to turn on DNS tunneling. So, as an attacker, you would use that to bypass any exfiltration controls going out of a network. In terms of the hardware, they're very effective. This is why I included quite a few examples of them so that you can see what is being done and what is being developed by way of trying to find ways to make you look at a device and go, oh yes, this must be fine. The example for the land turtle had a sticker on it that said, please do not remove. Mine used to have, oh, IT department, monitor, problem monitoring or something. And no one ever touches it. If it says IT department, it must be legitimate. Be aware and get some hacking knowledge and be aware of the attacks and threats in your network, I think is the best way to think about it, because these devices, these deceptions are very, very effective.
Thank you, Mark. Another question is from your own experience, which are the most common phishing scams out there?
Ooh, they can vary. Phishing scams tend to be aimed at either getting you to click on a malicious link and put in information. I think that would be, in my experience, the most common. I've done lots of phishing engagements in my experience, in my time as a penetration tester and hacking clients and showing them how vulnerabilities can exist. And by far, the most effective way to get someone to click on a link is, oh, here's an email migration, or yes, we've updated our terms and conditions. I think there's a lot of success that criminals have had from like, your Amazon order is ready. or has been mislaid. Please log in here to find out more. And they're very, very subtle as well. They tend to use like authentic looking logos in the phishing emails, and they try and get you to really believe that it's true. And they'll also use tricks, like they'll use so there was one going around on WhatsApp, I think, recently, where they were going to go to Asda.com. Asda is a retailer here in the UK. And the D was actually a D bar. I think it's a Polish letter where you have a D with a bar through the top, and it was very, very subtle. And that was going out via WhatsApp. That was a phishing instant message. And I think a lot of people clicked on that because it was unusual in terms of where it was coming through. So it tends to be, please click here for your order, tends to be, I think, the most effective. I used to do it when I was doing it for clients for things like email campaigns. We're doing an email migration. Click here to find out more. I actually once had a client complain to me, a client user complained to me by email to the phishing account that we have moved the server. Because they'd realized that they could log into their email. They'd actually bookmarked the login, and they were going to our phishing site, submitting the login details, and then going to the real site and submitting it again. So people really do get convinced by this stuff. And I think that it's having an awareness of where things are, using the appropriate security, adding the right certificates and that kind of thing to really combat it. But yeah, usually what you would call a redirection attack is most common.
Thank you, Mark. Now, because of the time limitation, we will only answer one more question, and the rest of the questions will be answered by you by email. The last question is, what can we expect from hackers in 2018 in terms of hacking strategies?
So I think we're going to see more attacks. I think phishing is still going to be a major problem. It's been too successful for cyber criminals to ignore. I think we're going to see more attacks on devices become prevalent. And I think that we're also going to carry on seeing, as much as it pains me to say this, I think we're going to still see the same old in some respects, which is things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, that kind of thing, still being around. I think the things that will improve, to give some light on it, the work of Scott Helm in trying to encrypt more and more of the internet, trying to by showing which of the, I think he uses the Amazon top 1 million websites and which ones are using decent cryptography in terms of their TLS 1.2 settings. I think we're going to see overall encrypted traffic increase on the internet significantly, which will mean that attacks that are more local to things like Wi-Fi hotspots will become slightly harder, but I still wouldn't log into your banking website on Cafe Nero or Starbucks Wi-Fi. But I think that we'll see the surge that we've seen in phishing attacks carry on growing, and I think that we'll also start seeing device attacks. My specialization is in low-level embedded systems and hacking those and finding problems in chips and devices. And we've seen so many devices being released and so many problems being found in those devices. I think that that's going to be a worrying trend, potentially, in 2018.
Last but not least, any advices for the credit card usage at the end of the year?
So I would keep your wits about you. Keep in mind your rights. If you think that you've been compromised, open up communication. No one's going to judge you, or they shouldn't judge you. And if they do, send them to me. But no, nobody should be judging you for having fallen prey to a well-crafted malicious link. Keep your wits about you. Check when you're ordering online that you're using decent security. You'll see the little green padlock in most browsers now. Check if you're worried or about to put payment data in. You can actually click on the padlock and check that the domain that you're on matches the certificate. And also, don't trust emails that ask you for passwords or ask you for payment details immediately. Just don't. If it seems wrong, it probably is. If it's too good to be true, it almost certainly is. So shop safe if you're shopping online, but don't let it put too much of a damper on your Christmas.
Thank you, Mark, again for this very informative presentation, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. I would like to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website and also on our YouTube channel together with the slides of the presentation. For more information, please visit our website www.pcb.com. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you.